This is the story of a house. The saying, if walls could talk, aptly applies to the Hammond Harwood house. Since the walls are unable to tell their story, I will. In order to fully understand the house, one has to know the history of the country, both nationally and locally. In the following exhibit, we will explore the man who built the house, Matthias Hammond, the architect, William Buckland, and the influence of Anglo-Palladian architecture on American homes. Before we proceed, the house must be placed in a proper historical context. Maryland was founded by George Calvert, Secretary of State and member of the Privy Council to King James VI of Scotland and First of England. In 1625, George Calvert saw the New World as an opportunity for Catholics such as himself to worship freely. King James honored Calvert with the baronage of Baltimore for his years of loyal service. Annapolis is not only the state capital, but it is also the home of the United States Naval Academy, built in 1854. The capital of Maryland was moved to Anne Arundel Town in 1694. The capital was also renamed Annapolis at that time. The governor at that time, Francis Nicholson, drew up a plan for the layout of the new capital. Nicholson also founded Williamsburg, Virginia. Annapolis became the first American city laid out in a Baroque plan of the central circle with streets radiating from the circle like spokes on a bicycle. Annapolis has two circles, State Circle and Church Circle. This shows the heavy influence that the Glorious Revolution of 1689 in England in separating church and state had on Great Britain and her colonies. State Circle was placed on the highest hill, while Church Circle was given the second highest hill. About 15 years before the American Revolution, Annapolis had its own golden age, which saw the building of some of the greatest examples of Georgian architecture in the U.S. In fact, Annapolis was the residence of four signers of the Declaration of Independence, who built great Georgian homes: William Paca, Thomas Stone, Samuel Chase, and Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Annapolis was also the backdrop for other significant events in history. For example, the Maryland State House is where George Washington resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. It was also in this room where the Treaty of Paris was ratified in January of 1784. Annapolis was also the first national capital in peacetime America from November 1783 to June 1784. Matthias Hammond. There are no known portraits of Matthias Hammond, even though he was very much a part of Annapolis's golden age, as well as part of the growing unrest between the colonies and Great Britain. Hammond was born on May 24, 1748. Most of what is known about Matthias Hammond are based on the selling and purchasing of land. He was a very successful tobacco farmer. His first appearance on public record was in 1760, when he was named in his father's will, which provided for him to inherit 16 slaves and 15 silver items. In 1773, Hammond was elected, along with William Paca, to represent the citizens of Annapolis at the General Assembly of the state of Maryland. Hammond supported radical forms of protest against the tax on tea. 1775 saw Hammond leading a group of citizens against Anthony Stewart, the owner of the Peggy Stewart. He paid the tea tax on smuggled tea that his ship carried. The incensed Hammond, which caused the owner of the Peggy Stewart to torch his own vessel. This was to support the boycott after the Boston Tea Party. As a ranking member of the Maryland legislature, he owned 4 lots on Maryland Avenue, just blocks from the State House. He wished for a townhouse worthy of his vast fortune and began looking for an architect. In 1749, Thomas Mason, son of George Mason of Virginia, tasked his son, while studying law in London, to find a well-trained joiner to finish the interior of his estate, Gunston Hall. William Buckland became an indentured servant for 4 years. Have you ever wondered where the term indentured servant came from? Ironically, it's not from the time one contracts to serve, but it's from the actual contract, which is cut in an indented way. Both parties must place each half of their contract to make sure that the indenture aligns up. Thus, they are indentured. Word spread of Buckland's ability as a joiner, and he was contracted to finish the interiors of other homes. William Buckland was brought to Annapolis by Edward Lloyd IV, who owned the unfinished Chase Lloyd House, which sits directly across from the Hammond Harwood house. In 1773, Matthias Hammond hired William Buckland to not only finish the interior of his home, but to build the home as well. This is the first and only commission that Buckland is known to have completed inside and out. Buckland began plans on the house using catalogs of architecture. These were quite common in the colonies. They provided inspiration and sometimes exact copies for clients. Buckland was known to possess Abraham Swan's British Architect, as well as James Gibbs' A Book of Architecture. We know that he was inspired by the drawing of the Villa Pisani by Andrea Palladio. I think you will agree seeing this image. Neither William Buckland nor Matthias Hammond owned Andrea Palladio's The Four Books of Architecture, but it is known that Edward Lloyd did. William Buckland had apprenticed as a joiner with his uncle in London in 1748. A joiner trains to build structures such as a home and public buildings. They are also master wood carvers, which Buckland excelled in, as far as we will see in the Hammond Harwood house. The period that Buckland was apprenticing as a joiner was quite an auspicious time to be learning his craft in London. Georgian architecture, so called for any building built during the reigns of the King Georges, was himself heavily influenced by Palladianism. The British architect Inigo Jones brought Palladianism to London after seeing works by the great Roman architect of Andrea Palladio. Jones translated Palladio's The Four Books of Architecture into a scale for English manor homes, rather than grand Roman buildings. This transition is called Anglo-Palladianism. Georgian architecture is much more than acknowledging a monarch. The Palladian style was meant to symbolize the rediscovery of the golden ages of Greece and Rome. The style of Andrea Palladio spoke to those in England that wished to return to a more restrained and less complicated style of architecture after the grandiose Stuarts. In the colonies, Palladianism came to symbolize the great republics of Greece and Rome, as well as their contribution to democracy. Colonial Georgian architecture has certain characteristics that set it apart from other styles of architecture. Some of those characteristics are bilateral symmetry, an emphasis on the center bay of the house with clearly defined doors and windows, sash windows with a 9, 12, or up to 18 panes within each window, a raised foundation, and a cornice emphasized by decorative moldings such as the dentils seen here. Buckland introduced the Anglo-Palladian influence with a projecting central pavilion topped by a pediment. The purpose of the pediment is to draw the eye to an entrance. Buckland uses a hipped roof, which means that all sides of the roof slope down to meet the walls. A doorway composed of Ionic columns supporting their own pediment. The house is situated along one of the streets radiating out from the State Circle. At the time of its building, along the Chase Lloyd House were the last on the street, putting them between urban and rural Annapolis. The house is what we call a 5-part house, meaning that the house is comprised of 5 masses. First is the central block, which is the primary residence of the family. Second, the wings, which were used for kitchen and offices. The wings are connected to the house by passageways called hyphens. The wings are semi-octagonal, with the left being rented out as offices so that the house made money even when Hammond wasn't in residence. The right wing was for the kitchen and servants' quarters. This was to keep the heat and possibly fire away from the main house. The front door, often called the most beautiful door in America. Here, Buckland deviates from a traditional entablature because it would be too large, thereby omitting the frieze and the architrave. The columns flank the arched opening, which are decorated in an egg and dart motif. Buckland's attention to detail in the draped roses over the spandrels betray his training as a joiner. The Ionic columns are topped with a pulvinated frieze, which is convex in profile and decorated with laurel leaves. The pediment above the door serves to draw the attention to the entrance of the building. This pediment is decorated with the same dentils as the eaves of the roof. Above the doorway, the eye is drawn to the vertical axis by the special treatment on the round bullseye window. The remaining windows on the facade are far more simple in their treatments. Buckland set the wooden frame windows back 4 inches after the London building codes established after the Great Fire of 1666. The facade shows the raised foundation. It is also symmetrical. The windows are the sash windows so characteristic of Georgian architecture. The brickwork is what is called Flemish bond, which is the strongest bond of brick. It alternates between header, the short side of the brick, and stretcher, which is the long side of the brick. These bricks are also what are called rubbed because they are uniform in color. Look closely and you will see a line of horizontal bricks or stretcher bricks. These are called the string course, and they correspond to the interior where the floor joists meet the wall, giving strength to this zone. As you enter the house through the front door, you come into the main hall, a trademark of a Georgian house. Buckland gives you a clear view to the main window of the dining room. The hall was also used for parties and functional to draw a breeze through the house in warmer weather. You will see 2 doors at the end of the hall. The door to the right is functional, while the one to the left is false, but gives symmetry to the hall. The first room that you enter on the tour is the downstairs study. Notice how the decorations in this room are not as intricate as we will see for other rooms because this room is primarily used by family. Also look at the bookcase against the wall. This is a John Shaw bookcase. He was known for being a great cabinet maker in Annapolis for his inlay work and intricate detail. The painting above the fireplace is a Rembrandt Peale. This was Charles Willson Peale's son. He went to Mount Vernon to paint this and was so nervous he took his father and brother, but he did not finish the painting for 40 years. The next room is what's called the best bedchamber. This is primarily used for the lady of the house to have tea when she has visitors, or this is where a guest would stay. Little more ornate than the study. The drapery on the bed is of a Chinese motif, which was also very popular in Georgian decorations. This is the first floor dining room. We have paintings by Charles Willson Peale. Also pay particular attention to the doorways, the windows, and the fireplace. These are intricately carved, very, very well done, which betrays Buckland's training as a joiner. The clock in this room is also another John Shaw piece. This is a painting of William Buckland, painted by Charles Willson Peale, who was also from Annapolis. The documents on the table in the painting are plans of the Hammond Harwood house. The house has a large collection of portraits painted by Peale and his children. The sash window does double duty. When the window is up, the wall portion opens up, giving access to the garden in the rear of the house. Notice the shutter also displays Buckland's attention to detail in its intricate carvings. The downstairs study. This room is obviously less public due to the simple details of the decorations. The Peale painting on the left has the exact chair that is seen in the foreground. Buckland chose not to focus the stairway in the front hall so that the hall would be more useful for parties. So it is off to the side, unlike Gunston Hall and other homes he worked on. The upstairs game room is another private room based on the less decorated nature of the trim. Compare this fireplace with that of the dining room. The ballroom is upstairs and is done in the federal style. The furniture is less heavy, with fine, slim lines. The molding around the room is thought to have been done by Buckland's apprentice, John Randall. Buckland had by this time died, possibly on the eastern shore. Take notice of the detail of the Chinese scenery in this mirror. This bedchamber is upstairs at the front of the house and would have been used by the lady of the house and the children. This would have been the main family bedroom. Notice the children's toys at the foot of the bed. They would have also used a trundle bed underneath the bed to sleep in at night. This is a portrait of Anne Proctor, painted by Charles Willson Peale. The doll in the chair under the painting is the same doll in the painting. Peale obviously scaled the size of the doll down to allow for the focus to be on the child. The doll was donated with the stipulation that it be displayed by the portrait. In the cradle next to the bed, there is a small rattle for the baby. In the close-up, you will see that it is also a whistle. This is another bedchamber across the hall from the main bedchamber. This is also at the front of the house. You will also notice the simplicity of the decorations. Simplicity does not mean cheap, though. The chest of drawers is another John Shaw piece. The tour ends in the kitchen. You can see the same octagon shape at the front of the room. By using this shape, Buckland provided for the best use of natural light all through the day. Construction on the Hammond Harwood house began in April of 1774. William Buckland did not live to see the completion of the house, as he died in either November or December of that year. Matthias Hammond is thought to have never occupied his house. Rumor has it that he began the house an engaged man, but his fiancée felt the house meant more to him than she did and would not marry him. Hammond abruptly left Annapolis for his country estate in Gambrels. He died in 1786. The house passed to his nephews, John Hammond, and on to Philip Hammond. Philip Hammond sold the house to Ninian Pinckney in 1810, who sold it to Judge Jeremiah Townley Chase in 1811. He purchased the house for his daughter, Frances Townley Chase Lockerman. Judge Chase's granddaughter married William Harwood, the great-grandson of William Buckland, the architect of the house. The descendants of Judge Chase lived in the house until the death of his great-granddaughter, Hester Ann Harwood, in 1924. When Hester Ann Harwood died, she left no will. Thus, the estate and its contents were auctioned in 1925, with the house being sold to St. John's College in 1926. In November of 1940, St. John's College sold the house at 19 Maryland Avenue for $42,500 to the newly formed Hammond Harwood Association Incorporated. The house is still owned and operated by the Hammond Harwood Association.